Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third and last day of your leading B2B gaming and esports conference, DGC MEA. Bring you news not only on a regional basis, but even on an international basis. Today, we're going to talk about more into the esports industry and game development, all happening today on your final day of DGC MEA. So let's start.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever it is that you're watching. Thanks very much for watching the session today. My name is Andrew Cook. I'm General Counsel at Fnatic, the leading team in esports, and in my view, anyway. Others may disagree, including some of the other fantastic teams that have been talking to you during the course of this conference, including our great friends at Team Liquid and FaZe Clan. I am going to be walking you through the esports ecosystem. And I'm also going to be talking to you about some of the strategic changes that have affected or that have happened within that ecosystem within the last 18 months for obvious reasons, and perhaps some reasons that are a little bit less obvious. I'll also briefly touch on esports for investors. Fnatic was the first pro gaming outfit to launch a crowdfund very successfully last year. We are one of the most backed crowdfunds of all time in terms of investor attention, if you like. 4,000 individuals, more than 4,000 in fact, invested in Fnatic in our last round. We're very pleased to share that round, not just with our fans and individual investors, but also with Marubeni Corporation that came on board as a strategic partner of ours in Asia, and also several high net worth individuals and family offices, raising the total amount that Fnatic has generated in terms of investment since inception to around $50 million. I'm going to assume in this talk that you know nothing about esports. So if you do know a little bit about esports, forgive me if some of the things that I say are obvious to me. Nevertheless, we've only got half an hour, so I'll go as quickly as I can. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, they're very welcome to direct those to me via the platform included around this conference, or indeed to find me on LinkedIn. So I'm always going to try and summarize things for you in a sort of like a takeaway format. My first takeaway, and this is really the critical takeaway for this talk, is that when you write the word esports, you don't use a hyphen and you don't use a capital S. Really, absolutely the number one takeaway for this talk: no hyphen, no capital S. That's your first takeaway. Second takeaway is when we're talking about esports, we're not talking about virtual sports or gaming generally. So what's gaming? Gaming is obviously an enormous industry. It's bigger combined in terms of revenue than movies and sort of prestige TV. About $175 billion generated through gaming annually. So 1.2 million gaming titles across the key 5 gaming platforms. So PC, the 3 main consoles: Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, and of course mobile. Mobile is the democratizing force within gaming, and the thing that's really starting to spread the power of gaming all the way across the developing world in particular, where it might be difficult to obtain a PC or even a high-end console, but everybody's got a mobile, most of them are smartphones, and most of those smartphones are ready to game on. So gaming as a whole, huge industry. Games that are popular within gaming may not necessarily be esports titles. So for example, FIFA, EA Sports FIFA, Madden, NBA 2K, we wouldn't necessarily describe those as being esports titles. However, they're obviously very, very well known. Why are they not esports titles? Well, the bulk of the players that play those games and watch people playing those games are sort of what you might describe as front room gamers. You probably know one, or maybe you're one yourself. You play it with your friends. You may can play ranked gaming online, but the sort of pro end of esports, and we have the pro FIFA player in our ranks. His name is Donovan Hunt. He plays under the name of Tex. He is the Roger Federer of FIFA, in the sense that he's been world number 1 forever and ever. An absolutely incredible young man, and somebody who has a very bright future overall. He is playing competitively FIFA, and we pay him to do that. But he only really drives a relatively small amount of traffic to that title. Really, what drives traffic and revenue for EA is, in fact, in-game purchases. So FUT, Ultimate Teams, card packs within those games drive billions of revenue. I think last year the figure is $1.8 billion in FUT revenue alone. So that's games. Then you've got virtual sports. So some of you may have seen that the IOC recently opened up in the Olympics a category of virtual games. This is things like rowing, cycling, and so on, where people will compete online using a static device, which is kind of similar or replicates the experience of cycling, cycle road racing, or indeed rowing. Virtual sports are not esports. A lot of the titles or a lot of the announcements around the IOC's decision said that esports are now in the Olympics. Nobody's playing League of Legends in the Olympics. I'm going to come back to League of Legends in a minute. Nobody's playing pro games in the Olympics. What they're doing is, I think they're broadening the base of access to competitive or competition, like elite level standards for people who may never have actually rowed on a body of water or cycled on a French Alp or whatever it may be. So that's definitely to be applauded, but it's not esports. What is esports? Esports is the elite tier of gaming. So I mentioned that 175 billion figure. Esports right now generates about $1 billion by itself. That's projected to grow quite substantially. Obviously, that has been affected by people being unable to attend venues in the last 18 months or so. Hopefully come back soon. We're already starting to see what are called LAN events back, including recently Valorant Masters. Again, I'll come back to Valorant in a minute. The key titles I want to start with in esports are the titles that have the most viewership. What do I mean by viewership? Well, the broadcast platform for esports titles, or the broadcast platforms, are primarily streaming platforms. So there is some linear TV coverage. So, for example, last year there was some esports footage or coverage by the BBC here in the UK. And there's been deals with ESPN to show it in the US, for example. But mainly people are consuming esports via platforms like Twitch, YouTube Gaming, and in China, Douyu and Huya. The most watched title in esports by quite some distance is a game called League of Legends. If you've never heard of League of Legends, that's okay. You just need to know that it's absolutely enormous in terms of viewership. 1.7 billion watched hours over the last year past. What's a watch hour? Well, there are two metrics for streaming. One is watched hours, which is total number of people watching times total period each person watched for, and what's called concurrent viewership, or CCUs, which is the most people watching at a particular time. So peak viewership, basically. Once you get to 1 million concurrent viewers, then you are a tier one esport in terms of viewership. So in this category, we can see League of Legends. League of Legends has about 5 times as much viewership as its sister title, Valorant. Valorant is a first-person shooter. So an example of another first-person shooter would be Call of Duty, which is also an esport. And then Valorant has about double the viewership of a game like FIFA. FIFA probably gets in about the top 20 of total stream games. Other popular esports, Counter-Strike, one of the oldest and longest standing esport titles, and Dota 2, similarly, a very long standing title and developed by the same developer as Counter-Strike. Okay, now as a sort of somebody who's getting used to getting into the space of esports, one of the questions that we often have is, okay, what's the world governing body for esports? And the answer is there isn't one. The king and queen and overseer of esports is dependent on the game. So in relation to League of Legends, and you've got to take your hat off to them, the developer Riot has created a fully vertically integrated system. So just to jump into traditional sports for a moment, in football, for example, nobody owns football, right? You don't need anybody's permission to get a ball out and kick it around in your front yard. That's not true of esports. Somebody does own League of Legends. It's Riot. Riot not only develops the game, it operates the league. And it operates the league through a very successful, so far, structure with basically 3 tiers. So the top tier is the World Championships, which happens once a year. Right now, it's happening in China. Or it's not happening right now. This year, it will happen in China. That is the most viewed tournament in all of esports by quite some distance. And some of the sums that are involved in that and statistics coming out of that are really pretty eye-popping. The next tier down is a sort of global league separated by geography. So, for example, the league for Europe is called the LEC, and that's like the UEFA Champions League, effectively. The league for America is called the LCS, and so on, right? So each of those separate geographies has its own elite tier league, and the winners of those leagues, very broadly speaking, end up at Worlds. And below that, you have regional leagues. So in Europe, the ERLs, this is the league that is, for example, based in France or based in Spain, Spanish teams with Spanish broadcasters playing, generally speaking, other Spanish teams with Spanish players. That drives interest in the product at the local level. The best players from that league often find themselves playing in the LEC. So, for example, we recently hired a young pro by the name of Adam Manan, who had come out of the French league. A absolutely fantastic season from him recently, brought him to the attention of our scouts, and we reconfigured our team to facilitate his entry. He has a great future ahead of him. We look forward to seeing what he can do as of this weekend, which the AC begins. So all that tournament stuff is run by Riot. They're running the game, they're monetizing the game. How much money has Riot made out of League of Legends in the last 3 years? You may be asking. So 2017 to 2020, Riot made $8.75 billion from League of Legends. So it's a pretty lucrative operation for them. They are now starting to monetize their IP in interesting ways. So if you don't know League of Legends, it's coming for you. I mentioned Counter-Strike, the OG eSport. Counter-Strike is organized in a very different way. Valve, the developer of Counter-Strike, is not interested, broadly speaking, in running tournaments. What it wants to do is run its store, which is called Steam. Again, you can see what they did there. Steam is like an iTunes for games. It goes across devices. You can download stuff from there and play it wherever you are. They hand over tournament rights to third parties. It's called tournament operators. This is someone like ESL or Faceit. We work very successfully with ESL in a tournament called ESL Pro League, which is like the Premier League of Counter-Strike. Very, very different in terms of logo presence, all those kind of things. In fact, across those 1.2 million games I mentioned earlier on, I saw a statistic today that said only about 25 of those games actually offer in-game sponsorable inventory for partners. But a very different structure. What motivates Valve, what causes them to act in relation to protecting their rights and so on, very, very different from Riot. As a sponsor or an investor, if you're looking at a organization, looking at the games that they play, understanding why they play the games and so on is really critical to understanding the opportunity. And just going back to that idea of why people play the games that they play, I think this is also really key when we think about that distinction between esports and games. It's commonly understood that people watch esports for entertainment, and that's definitely true. But the main reason they watch esports is to learn how to play esports better. And when you look at esports from that lens, what you see is that esports is actually a niche part of a massive funnel of people who are interested in gaming. So at the very top level of that funnel, there's 2.6 billion gamers globally. About half of those people are involved in what's called online ranked gaming. So this is, you play because you want to level up. So any of you who have seen anybody play Fortnite or have watched anybody play or have played Fortnite yourself will know that very regularly as you kind of accrue points through tasks. So this could be anything from driving cars at a particular pace, a certain amount of airtime, jumping cars off cliffs and stuff, all the way through to your usual acts of killing and so on. All that sort of thing creates points, and you level up. And when you level up to the next level, great things happen and explosions on screen and stuff. And that is encouraging you, of course, to continue to play. And as you level up, the people that you play with or you're matched with on the island in Fortnite, they are also better, so that improves your experience. Okay, so again, a couple of takeaways, or the takeaways so far, sorry. Number one, esports, no hyphen, small s. Number two, esports, gaming, virtual gaming, understand the differences. Takeaway three, how the game is structured and governed is dependent on the game. They're my three takeaways so far. Okay, number four. As I walk through the rest of the ecosystem just briefly, we talked about developers, we've talked about tournament organizers. I want to talk about the players. FaZe Clan is going to be talking to you, some of you may have already watched that content, about how working with talent within esports has developed. And again, as a sponsor or an investor in esports, really important you understand how involvement of talent has changed over the last 5 years. When we first started out in esports, very broadly speaking, you were paid to play the game. And the idea that you were paid to do something that you loved, of course, is a dream for us all. And players are very happy to get whatever they got. In some instances, that just could be, merch, a PC, and expenses. I can tell you now that you are seeing 7-figure contracts relatively often in the LEC. In fact, we've seen a $5 million transfer, perks from G2 in the LEC to Cloud9 in the LCS in the last League of Legends transfer window. And perks, I understand, was paid a pretty substantial 7-figure salary on top of anything that he might earn from prize winnings. So we're already in quite an elite tier of overall sort of income for these players, certainly equivalent to sort of B tier teams in Serie A, Bundesliga, and Ligue 1. Not quite Premier League salaries all the way through yet, but we're moving in that direction. As those players built their online audiences, they also became aware of what they could do to commercialize that audience. So you saw the rise of the streamer and influencer. So every esports pro is ranged along a spectrum now between people who just want to play the game, and there are definitely players who fit into that category, and players who use the game as a platform for their entertainment capabilities. And there are lots more, I would suggest, who probably fit into that category. We started with our very young pros. So we sign players, we start to be interested in players at 16. There are players younger than that, not in our organization, but in other pro gaming organizations, sort of 16 to 18. Players coming through at that level are now very aware of these different pathways and choose them more deliberately than pros from 5 years ago did. Pros from 5 years ago may have found themselves initially being good at the game, but started to build an audience, started to make money from that audience, and actually conceived of themselves as a career which was almost outside of esports. They moved into a space where they are just an entertainment talent. So you remember earlier when I talked about watched hours and concurrent viewership on streaming platforms. These are people who are able to deliver extremely high concurrent audiences day after day after day after day after day. And I can tell you, we're very proud to have not just a group of elite streamers that work exclusively with Fnatic, but we also have a streamer academy where creators come up, are spotted, are supported by our internal team, and hopefully graduate to our main roster. Some of those people are phenomenal, and it's men and women. We like to retain a 50-50 split on Fnatic Network, which is our academy network. Some of those people are absolutely incredible entertainers, the kind of entertainers that you would commonly see on television, and they will eventually be those crossover stars of the future, even if it is the case that television maintains its status as a kind of like the primary medium through which we consume entertainment. I think that is up for grabs at the moment. One of the things, again, a trend in esports is, for me, when I was born, In the UK, we had 3 channels. We subsequently moved to 4 and then to 5. So as I look at Netflix now, as somebody of 41 years young, I see Netflix, pardon me, and Prime and other similar services as being a huge amount of content, right? You can call it up on demand whenever you want. You can look at it on your phone. You can look at it on your laptop, whatever it may be. That seems like a lot of content to me because I started out with 3 channels. If you grew up with YouTube, then that looks actually like a pretty small amount of content because, of course, YouTube is effectively infinite. Content is being made faster than the pace at which you can watch it. And that is an important trend as well for investors' businesses. If the business that you're looking at from an esports standpoint does not have solid streaming metrics, does not have a plan to help you activate digital content through its broadcast channels, then you should ask good questions around that because it is now so important to us as businesses. Again, one thing that's so areas where we overlap with traditional businesses or traditional sports businesses, pardon me, we have apparel, we utilize our intellectual property. We have some, sporting revenue. So for us, that might be prize money. For traditional sports teams, that's obviously broadcast. The broad revenues are not there yet. They will come eventually. And then we have, for us, in-game items, in-game item spend. So this is skins, this is emotes, these kind of things. We put all that into the category of esports. For Fnatic, we also have a separate category, which is hardware. I'm wearing a Fnatic headset right now. Shop.fnatic.com, highly recommended, of course. Our hardware division is been something that's been very useful to us over the past 18 months. People have been at home spending money on their equipment to work from home or to game from home or whatever. So some overlaps there, but also I think in digital, we are well ahead of most traditional teams. Okay, I want to also talk then about the fans. So the role of fans is also going to be spoken, or our friends at Team Liquid are also going to be speaking to you in this conference about fandom. Also very important, I think, is to understand the role of fans in relation to esports. Just as traditional sports were originally, fans, esports is a community-driven project, right? Fandom is absolutely critical to the success of esports teams. Which sounds like the kind of thing that just gets thrown around. But if we think about how football clubs were originally conceived, they tended to come out of communities. It would be the men of the community represented on the pitch. So again, going back in time to my youth, black and white, insert kind of lines as we transition through history. My local football team was principally young men from England, Ireland, and Scotland, Northern Ireland. And it really wasn't until the sort of late 90s that you started to see international players come in. As money started to come into football, the bonds start to get frayed between local communities and the teams on the pitch. And the ultimate expression of that, if we then fast forward to the recent past, is, of course, the European Super League. The thinking behind the European Super League, which was that young people have very low attention spans now, and gaming is a huge competitor for attention for young people, the consumers of tomorrow. To use not our phrase, but that of the ESL, that of the European Super League. So what we should do is we need to create the hypest of hype products. Like every weekend, you need to be seeing a combination of Ronaldo, Messi, and Romelu Lukaku and Harry Kane all on the same pitch in some configuration in order to just attract hype, but of course for a price. That is the opposite of esports. For esports, we are still community driven. What that means is access is absolutely critical. And for sponsors, again, coming in, I think understanding that access dynamic is important because the best sponsors that we have worked with, most effective sponsors that we have worked with, have really understood that their role is to enhance the locations in which the gaming community already exists. So you're not trying to box it off. You're not trying to make demands of the gaming community. Instead, you are bringing things to life, or you're enhancing the experience of the gaming community. So I want to give you a recent example of an activation which proves this point. We recently partnered with Lavazza, the leading Italian coffee brand, and we built a map for them in Fortnite. Again, something which I'm sure many of you are aware of, the idea of the metaverse, the idea that basically humanity is moving online and it is expressing itself within digital spaces. So those of you, again, old enough to remember it, may remember something called Second Life, where people could go online, get an avatar, kind of exist in this virtual world. There was lots of property transactions going off all over the place. It was kind of briefly interesting to mainstream media about probably 15, 20 years ago now. This is that, but better. And gaming as a social space. So one of the first things parents often say to me when I tell them that I'm involved in gaming is they say, how can you get my kids off Fortnite? That would be really helpful. That's number one. Kids are on those spaces because that is the new social media. And so anything that we can do to create experiences in that space that enhance the experience for gamers immediately going to be really interesting to target demographic for a lot of these brands. So we built a Fortnite map in Fortnite, including Lavazza logos, Lavazza cups, icons of Italy, the campaign was called. Then we got a couple of our leading streamers based in Italy to play that map. The average dwell time within that map was about 27 minutes, which may not sound like very much. If you think about how many adverts that we're bombarded with every day, and they take up mere seconds of our attention, if even that, or how often or how annoying it can be if you listen to a podcast and perhaps you have a Spotify account, which isn't a premium account, and you have an advert butting in, or you get pre-roll on a YouTube clip and you have to sit there and wait for the skip button to come up before you can click it. We're measuring attention of customers in seconds. We are delivering an experience people want to be in on average for nearly half an hour. So for an advertiser, that is an absolutely incredible thing. And again, goes to that point that if you enhance the experience for fans, then you're going to win. Finally, I want to talk about the teams. So Fnatic, as I said, is a team. One of the longest standing teams in esports, 15 years at the top, $15 million in excess of that in terms of prize money. Many tournaments won. Our most recent solid result was a second in the first global Valorant tournament. Previously, we've been the inaugural winners of the League of Legends World Championships. We've been the inaugural winners of the Counter-Strike World Championships. So a storied organization that's now looking at its next 10 years in League of Legends. As I said, we recently raised quite a significant amount of money. Again, having previously raised that, investors including fan investors and major institutions and family offices and so on, have been ready to back Fnatic. And one of the reasons for that is our continual reinvention and pushing of esports performance in particular. Again, one of the things that we recognized as an organization quite some time ago, which is why we acquired a hardware business, is that in our view, esports, or as an esports team, you can't simply sell entertainment as a product. You have to sell a product as your product. A lot of organizations were working on the assumption that when esports viewership increased, eventually those broadcast rights that I mentioned to you before, which are a major driver of traditional sports revenues, not so much currently a driver of esports revenues. Once viewership went up, then in turn, of course, at least this was the theory, revenues would go up. Now, what happened over the last 18 months when everyone's at home and traditional sports are off the screen is that esports viewership does indeed absolutely explode. What doesn't explode in some instances, esports team revenues, because actually what the entertainment product does very often is it drives attention to individuals involved in entertainment. So those creators and players that I talked to you about earlier on, which makes sense. They are at the centerpiece of this. If you've ever watched Twitch or esports content on YouTube, it does tend to be the creator at the center of things, and the game is almost secondary to that. In fact, interestingly, the number one category on Twitch, and it always has been because Twitch is separated into categories, is just chatting, which is people literally just talking to the camera. So those are the people who are at the front and win most from the massive increase in interest in esports. The creators, not the teams that employ the creators necessarily. So obviously we gain from them in terms of brand growth, putting our brand in places that it couldn't be, our ability to communicate sponsor messaging to an audience and so on. But we've had that benefit of having the products. Lots of teams have made moves in the last 6 months. So if you've previously been interested in investing in an esports team, or you've been interested to sort of partner with one, maybe you might have looked at it with your board or something like that a few years ago. It's time to maybe have another little look at that, because so much has changed in the landscape. And I can tell you, because I'm proud to be involved in the discussions, certainly amongst the major leagues, there are also some active discussions going on about what the long-term state of esports looks like. Okay, well, that was a bit of a rapid sprint around the esports ecosystem. I hope it was helpful. As I said at the very beginning, you're welcome to send me comments through the comment facility included within the infrastructure for this conference, or please do connect with me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, thanks very much for your time, and thank you very much again to the organisers for having me.